Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and we're very privileged today to have with us, coming from Berkeley, California, independent scientist Leuren Moret. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you, Alfred. Very nice to be on again. It's always exciting for everyone.
Right, exactly. You know, I know that today, before getting to uh, uh, our news, you wanted to touch on uh, a subject of the strategies, the reasons for we've been getting into all of these wars, kind of a special segment, and then we can go back and getting into the topics for this particular broadcast. Do you want to do that now?
Sure.
Yeah. So take us through that, please.
Well, I've been following the Ukraine war, and that's sort of put on hold right now. And then the focus went to Syria after Putin made a speech at the United Nations on September 29th, 2015, and announced that he was going into Syria at the request of the president of Syria, Assad, and helping him clean out the thousands of their mercenaries, actually, terrorists for hire. It's a proxy army which the U.S. and Britain put together, and then sort of started sending them out around the world to carry out terrorist disasters. And this is to persuade people in their own countries to be afraid of what is like an internal enemy. They're really external, but they're in the country, so they're an internal enemy. And so it brings the people together under the leadership, and also because of frightening people to death, they're willing to give up their freedoms, their constitutional rights, and things like that to feel safe. And so the government promises to make them safe, and then just turns it into a police state, which is what's happening in the U.S. now and many other countries. So, then I started learning more as I watched the Syrian war about Lebanon internal affairs and their struggles with terrorism, and some of the big leaders of the terrorist groups in Syria are from Gulf and Mediterranean states, as well as Chechnya, the Caucasus countries, and Central Asian countries like Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. So there are mercenaries from over 40 countries fighting in Syria. And so the bombing campaign started on September 30th. Russia is providing air support for the Syrian army and volunteer ground troops, including the Kurds. And it's been phenomenally successful. It has showed how weak the American military is, and that we no longer have weapons superior to Russia's. And also the threat of China and Russia facing the U.S. military. The U.S. military could not overcome both countries involved in a military conflict. So I see a lot of things changing. But as I began learning more and more about, now we're in Libya again. We just overthrew Gaddafi when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And this is very, very, very important for Americans to know about this before the elections in the fall, because she was involved, we know now, from the the emails that were released because of a FOIA request, a court order, that she was recommending that the U.S. hire mercenaries. This is when they were overthrowing Gaddafi, who was a legitimately, democratically elected president of Libya, who had provided a higher standard of living in Libya to the people than the English people enjoy in that wonderful country of freedom and liberty, England, when I'm being sarcastic about it. Because how could the greatest nation in the world, I mean, the sun never sets on the British Empire, how could they have a lower standard of living after looting countries for hundreds of years? And I guess they didn't pass it on to the ordinary people. Then how could they have a lower standard of living than a supposed North African backwards country? Well, it turns out Libya wasn't backwards at all. And it's turning out Syria isn't backwards at all. And it's especially turning out that Yemen isn't backwards at all. So the wars in Libya, and again in Libya now, 5 years later, in Syria that went on for 4.5 years and completely destroyed that country internally. Iraq, the U.S. destroyed Iraq. Well, the U.S. is back in Iraq. Why are we in all these countries? Why is the U.S. involved in some ways in Yemen? We have no business being over there. They know how to run their own countries. The problem is we won't let them. And so it turns out, Alfred, finally I figured it out. This is a war about control of the Red Sea. And the choke points are the Suez Canal that empties into the Mediterranean, where Egypt has just given Russia a very large chunk of land right at the entrance of the Suez Canal into the Red Sea in the Mediterranean. And it's not only a military port, but it's a free trade zone. And so this is the beginning of the Silk Road, the buildup and development in the Mediterranean region in North Africa. And Putin extended the Silk Road. It starts in Beijing, goes to Moscow, and then to Berlin, and then it goes on to the Middle Eastern countries, and it ends up in Egypt. And then just yesterday, it was announced in the Middle Eastern news. I like to read the news sites. They're in English of many of the Gulf state countries in the Middle East. You get a lot more information. Well, apparently, China has leased a port in Djibouti, which is at the south end of Saudi Arabia, of the Red Sea. And Saudi Arabia borders it on the east side, and Egypt borders it on the west side. Now, at the south end of the Red Sea are the Straits of Bab al-Mandeb in Taiz prefecture or province. And this is a very, very, very important port going all the way back thousands of years to the spice trade in Southeast Asia. And we know that in the Mesopotamian period, the Sumerian period, this is a long time ago, that the Middle Easterners were sending ships, boats to India and to Asian countries and to Southeast Asia for spices and other items, gold and all kinds of things they were trading. And And so the spice trade was delivering the spices to the Bab al-Mandeb city or port, and then they would be taken in camel caravans all over the Middle East and probably other places too. So this is nothing but the old Silk Road all over again, and it's not only by railroad from Beijing to Egypt, but it's also by sea, and that is the Southeast Asian, primarily spice trade, which of course will now be expanded. And so all of these mercenaries that the U.S. and Britain sent into, they're now in Europe, these terrorists. They're all through the Himalayas, all the way to the Chinese border, and probably in China too, where in Xinjiang, which is where the Islamic tribes are in China. And so Russia has a port now on the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. No one can go through that canal without permission. And at the south end of the Red Sea is Djibouti, and the announcement yesterday that China is now breaking ground on a Navy logistics port which will provide oil, water, and food. And they will not have weapons there. Djibouti's a neutral country. So this is what the fight's really over. And the U.S. and the British want to control the energy traffic. In other words, they want to track all the ships and all the energy and where it goes and how much was paid for it and everything that's coming out of the Middle East, coming out of Turkey, coming out of Israel and Palestine. They have vast oil and gas deposits, especially natural gas deposits offshore. So we have another energy war is basically what it's about. And the U.S. is being squeezed out of Eastern Europe by Russia. The U.S. is being squeezed out of the Middle East. And so the U.S. is desperate to increase the trade and to trap a lot of countries in the Pacific Rim into the TPP agreement, and New Zealand has just signed on for that. That's going to be terrible for every country because it's just another way for the U.S., a stronger, more armed country, to use racketeering and extortion to steal money from these countries. And the U.S. has a parallel treaty they're trying to get European countries to sign. It's the TTIP thing, I think. And there's more resistance in Europe because they have more choices on trading in a longer history, for instance, with Russia and the Middle East and so forth. So we'll see what happens. But this is going to affect every American's life. And that's why we're talking about this. There are going to be more wars and conflicts. There's going to be more pressure from Russia for NATO and the U.S. to leave the Eurasian continent. And as more European countries understand how they're being hurt by the sanctions against Russia, by all the things the stupid things the U.S. is doing to try to bully people in. You see, Russia has a completely different approach. They have diplomatic channels they prefer to go to rather than starting a war to get what they want. They want long-term, mutually beneficial, permanent relationships for trading, and that's what creates wealth. That is the economy of the Silk Road, and it always has been. And it made those countries along the Silk Road tremendously wealthy. It's wealth that you could never steal, because you couldn't make that much money stealing. You finally eat the host, and then the parasite dies. So basically, that's what's happening, and it's a very, very interesting and a very exciting time. There is very little that's truthful in the Western media, and I recommend that people go to Al-Ahram in Egypt, Pars News in farsnews.com in Iran. Lebanon has some newsletters, newspapers online, and the other Gulf states, UAE, so forth and so on. Much better sources for information.
Well, thank you. Now, we actually had a viewer write in with an urgent request, and I'm wondering if we should talk about that now, and then get on to the regular items. What do you think about that? It's a very urgent matter about a bill in Virginia that has passed the Virginia Senate that would allow all Virginia law enforcement officers, police officers, names to be withheld from the public. And it's SB 552. And this seems it's the institutionalization of the police state. And so I just wanted to mention that if people who live in Virginia can contact the Virginia legislature. It's passed the Senate, but it'll soon be taken up by the House of Delegates subcommittee and all of the members of the House of Delegates, and then lobby the governor to veto it if that's passed. SB 552 would allow all Virginia law enforcement officers' names to be withheld from the public, which means that you can't get any name of any police officer, anyone who's involved in a shooting, anyone at all. So, Leuren, do you have any comment on that, or?
I sure do. We have had exercises since our colored revolution occupied the Occupy movement, and when that happened, we started having exercises in California. In fact, in Berkeley, and these were American troops, military, doing exercises, terrorist exercises, under a program called Urban Shield. And they brought soldiers from Gulf region states in the Middle East. Israel was represented. There were soldiers from other countries. And they did terrorist exercises. Guess where they held them? Of all the places in the San Francisco Bay Area, they held them on the UC Berkeley campus. Of all places to hold military terrorist exercises. It's ridiculous. And so I know from what was in the papers and covered here, and they do it every year, and there are more troops every year, more intense, a longer period of time. And then it was in the Russian news about 2 to 3 years ago. A Russian told me that a news article had come out that Obama, our president, had called President Putin of Russia a couple of years ago and requested 5,000 Spetsnaz troops. Those are special ops for Russia to send to put at Obama's disposal, and Putin agreed to do it. So that's another telltale sign. Why are we having UN troops? And we had Mexican troops exercising here, waving their own flags and driving in jeeps all over Texas. Why are all these foreign countries coming into the U.S.? And it's because they're going to do something that the American people are not going to like. They don't really trust American military or National Guard or whatever to do it, because they might side with the American people. So they're bringing foreigners. And since they're already here, we have Homeland Securities being run by two Soviet KGB generals, and they were at Livermore Lab in 1989 when I was working there, transferring the technologies of political control from the Soviet Union to the United States government. So clearly, we are headed for a police state. And to confirm it, I'd like to mention Jade Helm, which was a military exercise that began in mid-July of the summer of 2015, just about 6 months ago. And that really has changed everything, not just in the United States, but around the world, because it was the introduction of cyber command. And this is a new fusion under the direction of Admiral, let's see what's his name, Admiral Rogers. And he has absorbed NSA, the satellite people, into the Cyber Command, which existed already, and it's a much bigger organization now. And all of a sudden, people are complaining all over the U.S., all over the world, even Russia, about interference by the Cyber Command with people's computers, with access to the internet, with all kinds of technical problems. And certainly every person who is in opposition to things that are happening now and are vocalizing it through the internet or other ways, we're all being targeted. Our computers are a mess, and we spend most of our time recovering from computer attacks. That's certainly what my friends are telling me, and my experience is, and this is all to attack people's constitutional rights in the U.S., to freedom, to free speech, to equal access, so forth and so on. So this is not a small thing that you've mentioned that your listener has provided for your awareness and to be able to report on. And I might add there are a couple more examples of this encroachment. One is the FBI fighting with Apple for the code to access someone's cell phone database and so forth. And Apple refused to give it to the FBI, so there'll be a big lawsuit over it. It'll probably go to the Supreme Court. And we've just lost Judge Scalia, who was on the U.S. Supreme Court. He was very, very conservative, and he actually was almost always on the side of the Constitution and ruled in favor of upholding constitutional rights. So we've lost him. And so now we have an unpredictable Supreme Court, and it's unclear whether Obama will appoint the Scalia replacement before he leaves office, or will it be up to the next president? And if it's Hillary Clinton, we're going to be in wars up to our eyeballs as long as she's in the White House. So I think that's very relevant to bring this up now, especially with the election coming up.
Right, exactly. Now you wanted to then, I think, to talk about the Jesuit Pope and the Russian Orthodox patriarchs, Kirill's visit to Cuba and other parts of the planet.
Yes, I would call this the Jesuit Pope and the Russian Orthodox Patriarch from Moscow go to Cuba and beyond. Now, remember, Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Jesuits are not supposed to be popes. Jesuits do not believe in God. They do not have a religion. They're atheists. And Castro has said many times he's created a Jesuit colony on Cuba during his reign of office, and that was not an accidental Jesuit colony. There are many reasons for it, and I think that I found in the news in the early 2000s, maybe 2002, a Russian Orthodox nun told me more about what's going on than I realized. And so I was very, very interested in this meeting in Cuba. So the Pope is Jesuit, and he's an illegal Pope. Castro is Jesuit, and he said in the media, I don't believe in God, we're atheists. And let's see, it's the Pope, and then of course Cuba is a Jesuit colony. So why are they having a meeting in this Jesuit-heavy environment with the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, which went through a schism with the Catholic Church in Rome over 1,000 years ago, and split off and went to Constantinople. And then the headquarters later was moved to Moscow, to Russia. So it's a big, big, big mystery why that patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow would agree to even meet with these people, because they have been the enemy for over 1,000 years. And what I found after this nun, Russian Orthodox nun, had told me about a little more about it, I started looking for information about Putin and if he was involved, because she told me he was. And there it was. I found about 3 newspaper articles translated into English where he ordered the Moscow patriarchs to submit to the Pope of Rome, or for Russian Orthodoxy to go officially under the Pope of Rome, returning to a state of clash of religions that occurred 1,000 years ago. And there it was. Putin had ordered the Moscow patriarchs to go under the Pope of Rome back in 2002, and he gave them a deadline. It was like 2005 or 6. They didn't meet that deadline, but obviously this meeting in Cuba is a much more serious indication that they've been talking a lot. And also the Serbian church is the Orthodox Church is not under the Pope of Rome, and they are very, very infiltrated now, just as the Russian Orthodox Church is very infiltrated at the highest levels.
Right, and it's very interesting that Obama, U.S. President Barack Obama will be joining them in Cuba next week.
Yes, that's very interesting because wasn't he there not very long ago? He keeps going to Cuba. That's very strange.
Yeah, how would you spin that one out?
There's a whole lot of talking going on. There are deals being made. There are handoffs happening. I know why Castro created a Jesuit colony there. He's directly descended from Pope Paul III, Alessandro Farnese, who in the 1500s became Pope Paul III, and he also started the Jesuits with a Borgia. And it's the House of Farnese and the House of Borgia, I believe, are two of the top ancient Iranian bloodlines that are controlling the world. And there is definitely a plan for the Americas, what was a long time ago the New World, referred to as the New World. But those Jesuits I became aware of, I said, that's got to be a colony for Castro to send them around the Americas to as sort of sleeper cells or his spies or whatever. That's exactly what they're for, because one of them is running a Nichi. Well, it was called Nichiren Shoshu, which is a Buddhist sect from about the 12 or 1300s in Japan. And it was infiltrated in about 1963 by a group called Goka Sokai. And this is also a Goka Sokai, I think it's Japanese. It's Japanese or Chinese. Oh, no, it's Japanese. And Goka Sokai is an international organization that was completely discredited in the early 1990s, and they were thrown out of the Nichiren Shoshu temples and groups. And they meet as a lay organization now, the Soka Gakkai, but they call themselves Buddhists. But the Soka Gakkai are agents of the Jesuits, and there are a lot of Jesuits in China. There are a lot of Jesuits in Japan because they came in the early 1500s with the Spanish and the Portuguese. So this man in Los Angeles is the lay head of the Soka Gakkai fake Nichiren group, and Native American asked me about them and asked me about him, and could I find out something? He said, well, I was going there and I really liked it. I like Buddhism, but he said strange things started happening and I felt really uncomfortable. And he said this man who's the head of it is Cuban, but he's married to a Japanese woman, and they go from LA to Japan and LA to Cuba all the time. So they have regular interaction, and obviously these are some kind of business trips. And so this is also something that these ancient Iranian tribes have always done, and this is how they've maintained control. It's by controlling religion. And so this is obviously a Jesuit practice that Castro is spreading these people, Jesuits, into different countries in the Americas to infiltrate religious groups and take them over. And when the first ancient Iranians from the Parthian Empire, when that collapsed, Some of them went to, these would be the royals and nobles, they escaped to Japan, they escaped to China, they intermarried with the royal families and imperial families. And this is very interesting. The ancient Iranians, these Parthians who went to Japan, immediately became the temple builders of Buddhism in Japan, even though they were Zoroastrians, in other words, fire worshippers from the ancient Iranian tribes. So here is evidence of Castro infiltrating organizations in the United States. And Ohio, by the way, is very, very heavily infiltrated by Jesuits. And there are activists even who are living there who must be affiliated with the Jesuits because they've undermined websites and friends of mine without any explanation. They were really friendly and everything, and then all of a sudden they took over the website, got the code, and then blocked everyone from having access to it. So they're not nice people. Another thing that's happened, which this Russian nun told me about, is that when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, Russian Orthodox people, those were the white Russians, left Russia and went and lived in other countries around the world. They bought property, they built Russian churches and retreats and so forth. So the Russian church outside of Russia has accumulated a lot of wealth from the Russian Christians, Orthodox Christians, who have donated it. And I know that you've been told about it, and I also sent you the film, Alfred, of the second kidnapping of a very elderly, but one of the high-level Russian Orthodox priests or patriarchs in Canada. And the first time they kidnapped him, this is a fake lawyer with fake papers and thugs in a big limousine with tinted windows, and they just pulled up to where he lived in a place for male priests to live, and they kidnapped him, and he managed to escape from the house they had him locked in, and he went back to his retreat, and they came again and kidnapped him, tried to kidnap him, and this is all on film. And someone in the house called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and what they did was they came into the woods where this retreat was, and they blocked all of the roads going in and out so that the limousine could not leave with the priest who'd been kidnapped. And after that, the lawyer and the thugs drove off, and they never came back. They never bothered him again. But the purpose of this strange behavior is that now the Moscow Patriarchy of the Russian Orthodox Church is trying to do land grabs and steal the land that is outside of Russia and beyond their reach. They're trying to vacuum it all up around the world and quickly pull it under their roof. And then, of course, the groups all over the world they have a choice of either joining the Russian Patriarchy, which will end up being under the Pope, or they can just slowly sort of disappear without resources and money and everything, without the benefits they've had since the Bolshevik Revolution in other countries. So we see this one world order still, there's a shadow of it over everything. And I just think that people are terribly ignorant. They're not aware of what's really happening. It's not their fault. They can't travel all over the world all their life, looking for news. But it's because our news in the West is owned by a very small group who have a very large interest in controlling what we know and keeping us ignorant. And it's only through the independent media, like what we're doing today, that the facts get out. So I hope that people will look for good information, base their voting decisions on good information, and if they're not satisfied with what they're getting on TV or in the newspaper, go to newspapers and news sites outside of the U.S. But that is exactly what Admiral Rogers is trying to do with CENTCOM, is to cut everyone off from good information. It's exactly what the reason is. So China now and Russia are both starting new internets, global internets. They won't be ready for maybe 3 or 4 years, but we are going to have choices other than an American internet system.
What are your thoughts on the fact that the patriarch went to South America and Antarctica from Cuba?
Well, I was very interested in what countries he went to in South America. They were countries that had Russian Orthodox people established there, so he probably wanted to go for that reason. But some of them were countries, such as Argentina, that have very substantial mineral right claims on Antarctica, and that includes Russia. There are 9 English bases in Antarctica, 7 Russian, 3 Japanese. There are other bases there, but I don't know how, like the U.S., but I don't know how many the U.S. has. But most of these are HARP bases. And what they're doing is they are searching for minerals. They can do it from space. They are mapping mineral deposits from space, and they can go subsurface a very large distance. They can scan across the mineral bodies, and these are prospective mining sites to make lots of money. And they can determine, by scanning across the ore body, they can determine in 3D what the richness of the ore is, so they can map where it's very rich and where it's not so rich. They can take all that information and they can calculate down to the dollar or the pound or the yuan or the ruble exactly how much money they'll make mining that ore body. It's just that precise now. And Bechtel's been doing it for years from space, from satellites actually. But HARP has many, many uses. There are also mind control. The name of the Japanese base, the newest one, which opened about 2 months after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, it's called Pansy. And I found it on the Nikon camera site, corporation camera site in Japan. And they have a big stake in HARP, as many corporations do. They're involved in all kinds of war technologies, developing and everything. And it said, Kodak said very proudly about this new military base in Antarctica, that it's named for the pansy, which is a beautiful little flower in the gardens that people enjoy all over the world. And it's from the word penser, which in French means to think or thought. So do you think that might be a mind control base, Alfred?
Interesting.
And also, There are a lot of changes now in New Zealand. The South Island has been removed from the nation of New Zealand. It's under the Queen now. And of course, as the Queen of the Commonwealth, she has personal possession of the mineral rights to the entire Commonwealth. It's something like 25 countries and territories. So the English piece of that mineral pie in Antarctica is hers personally. And of course, when she dies and William becomes the king, it will be his.
Right.
That's mind-boggling to know that she owns the mineral rights to that much of the world. That's incredible. It's just incredible. That's why 85% of the world owns nothing, and 15% owns all the rest. And that has happened over thousands and thousands of years. It's not an accident, and it's not how people want to live. It's slavery, and it's what this one world government is after. They want to enslave all of humanity except themselves. And it's the Brzezinskis and the David Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, the monarchs, the greedy monarchs, the nobility. Not all of them are bad, but those positions are a reward for serving the powerful people, not for serving the poor people.
You've also been focusing on the increased radiation and chemical leaks in the U.S. in terms of there being part of this depopulation policy. Do you want to talk about some of that?
Well, it's very, very disturbing. Not just for me. It's very disappointing. It's very dire to keep reading. Every week there are more radiation leaks in nuclear power plants. There are more releases from Fukushima. There are more sea mammals and fish dying. The oceans are dying now. It's just incredible. And it's the Wigner effect, the effect of radiation on matter, has been especially pronounced on airplanes. And, oh gosh, the number of emergency landings has just increased exponentially since Fukushima happened. And pilots and crew dying, not to mention frequent people who fly frequently. The health effects are just devastating, and it's been very devastating to the airline industry. All of the producers of airplanes, commercial or military, around the world have had to change the materials they're making the planes out of now, because they've got to have a coating on metal surfaces, or the radiation will just cause the metal to crystallize and embrittle. It's gotten so bad that wings are falling off of airplanes now. Engines are falling off of airplanes in mid-flight. Fighter jets and planes like that, the canopies are flying off in mid-flight. Pieces are falling off of the plane in mid-flight. They're going pretty fast. And I have pictures of Christina Consolo's flight to Mexico and back. She had to change planes 4 times, and they were different airlines. So she was photographing. She kept getting a seat by the wing so she could photograph the surfaces of the wings on each of those flights. And they have been using airline duct tape or airline scotch tape, or whatever you want to call it, on the surfaces of the wings to hold cracks together. They're sealing cracks with this sticky tape, and you just go, do I really want to be on this plane? Is this going to work? I mean, am I going to land in one piece? And it's not funny anymore. It's horrifying. So the airline industry globally has been very affected by this.
Right. Exactly. So, what is your expectation of where we're headed in terms of Fukushima?
Well, Fukushima is just unsolvable because they don't want to solve it, and it's just continuing to release. It's just very upsetting to know that that's our baseline now, and that any other radiation that's released is going to be on top of that, add to it cumulatively, and it's not a small consideration at all, because just in the last week or two, there was finally the Santa Susana facility, the Rocketdyne Raytheon facility in San Fernando Valley, has been leaking fresh radionuclides from a research reactor for years and years and years into the groundwater there. And apparently when this big methane fire started, this big methane release down faults from the Santa Susana facility, that radiation has been migrating underground through river channels and underground streams because it's right at the base of the San Angeles Mountains that surround the Los Angeles basin. And so that methane, that somehow there was a fire underground. I don't know if it was tar oil that's natural deposits there, or whether the methane caught on fire, but the smoke was black. And I knew right away that it was contaminated with radiation, because Dr. Chris Busby was an expert witness on the lawsuit against Rocketdyne and Raytheon for causing the deaths of many, many children, and something like 50 parents filed lawsuits together, and Chris Busby was the expert witness for the law firm. Now, what he told me is that he had found absolutely fresh fission products in the groundwater. These are with 10 hours or less half-life, so they had to have just been released because they would be undetectable in another day. And he said that he also discovered that research reactor had had the license to operate revoked by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission 10 years before. So they not only were spilling it all over the place, and they were killing children hundreds of miles in every direction for years, and but they were illegally operating it, and I just can't even believe that they would be that stupid to do that. Anyway, Chris told the lawyers within a week that the Raytheon lawyers had settled out of court for over $250 million. And of course, that doesn't replace a child that you lose. You never ever gain that back, and then all the tragedy for the family. The money isn't really meaningful, but he said that they settled out of court and sealed the case and everything because he said everyone in Los Angeles was contaminated from Rocketdyne, Santa Susana. And if you remember, there was a film studio that Michael, what's his name? Michael Landon bought a big piece of property there because Rocketdyne and Raytheon were selling the contaminated land without telling people. And so Michael Landon wanted to start another studio, so he bought that, and everyone who worked there making movies or in movies, who were in movies, they all got cancer. Many of them died, including Michael Landon. So there's a long history there. The spill's very well known, but some of the other spills are not so well known. For instance, Indian Point this week in mid-February has been leaking radiation, and it's about 20 miles outside of New York City. So New York City's being contaminated by Indian Point, as well as 5 other nuclear power plants that are upwind in Pennsylvania from New York City. So it's getting all the radiation from at least 6 nuclear power plants. That's a disaster. And the cancer rates and breast cancer rates are very high on Long Island and around New York City. And diabetes is extremely high in the Black communities. And it's because the U.S. government has official U.S. policy to take the most contaminated dairy products from dairies around nuclear power plants, and through the state milk boards, they're shipping them directly into poor and minority communities to cause a genocide. They've been doing it for a long time, and the disease rates in prostate cancer, in endometriosis, in breast cancer, in diabetes, in chronic fatigue syndrome, in asthma, especially in children, is very, very high in these poor areas with minorities living there. That's U.S. national policy. It's a hidden genocide by the U.S. government. Another disaster or potential nuclear disaster was this week at Diablo Canyon, which is halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, more or less halfway. And at first there was a rumor on the internet that the Diablo Canyon was leaking. And then not very long after that, that disappeared. And it came into the news that a man who was a stranger with no business being there was found in the plant. And so they arrested him and took him away. And then they announced there was no leak. But I really do wonder what kind of a false flag that was, or who set it up, or what in the world was that man doing there, or is it foreshadowing a leak that's going to happen in the future at Diablo Canyon, because they do like to shadow events. Now, the third thing is it's Chernobyl, and the Chernobyl sarcophagus, the covering over it that was hastily put up, and the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab had people there at Chernobyl right after it happened. So they have their own reports. They know what happened. And that sarcophagus has fallen apart. It's partly the Wigner from the Wigner effect. And they kept saying, Ukraine kept saying, we don't have money, we don't have money, we don't have money to replace it. And all of a sudden, there are news stories coming out predicting another disaster at Chernobyl, and all of a sudden the money appeared to replace that sarcophagus, and that's within the last 2 or 3 weeks that I know about it. So not only are the Fukushima nuclear power plant is poisoning the world, but they've had a number of events now in the last 2 years with this Kiev junta in charge, where there were very, very large Chernobyl-level releases in November and December of 2014. And there have been some since. They don't advertise them very well or announce them. But also, there was a fire at Chernobyl in the most contaminated zone where the radiation levels are so high the bacteria don't break down leaves and detritus that fall off of trees. So when that caught on fire, that detritus, radioactive detritus, was 10 feet deep. And all of that burned and remobilized all the radiation, and they had almost nothing to fight that fire with, and it was almost impossible to put out, especially when it gets underground. And so these events are not accidents. They just absolutely cannot be. And radiation is a poison. It's the Jesuits who are behind all of this poisoning through depleted uranium weapons and bombs and so forth. Nuclear weapons. The Vatican, in fact, gave the scientist who invented the neutron bomb, Sam Cohen, the highest Vatican civilian peace award for inventing the neutron bomb. And the neutron bomb kills the people in a region where it detonates, but it doesn't damage the infrastructure. And the radiation has almost completely disappeared 2 weeks after the bombing. So what's it for? Depopulation. Why did the Vatican reward that? Why is the Vatican sponsoring and encouraging global genocide? And the answer is the Jesuits are part of them and they're part of the Jesuits, and they all work for the ancient Iranian bloodlines. And many of the popes of Rome, pretending to be Christians, were actually Iranian Zoroastrians. And you can look at the papal tiara, that big egg-shaped domed hat that the Pope traditionally wears. That's from Central Asia. That's what the Iranian tribal leaders or the heads of their empires wear. The papal slippers, the little red leather slippers that Ratzinger wore all the time, that's from Central Asia. You start looking, and the signs and symbols, it's all there. They're from Central Asia, many of the traditions and beliefs.
Right. Now, you had also talked and been tracking the U.S. arms industry and the state of the U.S. arms and armed forces compared to that of the Russian arms. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, this is very, very interesting because this whole Syrian and Ukrainian conflict, not so much Ukrainian, but the Syrian conflict, has exposed the real state of the American military. And it's not good. They were overconfident. They don't know what they want. Obama and the Pentagon have been completely confused. They don't know what they want. That's why this whole Syria thing has not gone the way they wanted it to. They didn't know what they wanted, and Russia did know. And Putin has an international law degree. He has a very extensive experience throughout his life with martial arts. That's a discipline that teaches you the art of war. And the American military just doesn't have that. Also, the Russian military is transitioning right now to a professional army. And it's quite different from what we have. They don't recruit. They take volunteers, and then they really, really train them, and very, very well. And in this time when the U.S. was involved in other wars and everything, Russia has very quietly been developing weapons in the background, and they have been rolled out very strategically and very timing-wise, very, very, very psychologically powerfully during this Syria conflict. And it's only been 4 months, October, November, December, January, almost 5. And so what the Russians showed is that they have very, very superior weapon systems. And with China as a military partner, the U.S. can't win against them. And that just has started coming out in the news. And it's with the defeat of U.S. foreign policy in Syria, which is, it's all falling apart right now and turning into a diplomatic discussion and so forth. The U.S. is still trying to get something, but they're not going to. Putin's got all the cards now, and he's playing them. And so the problem with the U.S. in terms of weapons designs is that weapons designs in the U.S. are done by committee. And so the Pentagon will go to Congress and say, we want to build a new plane, like the F-35. And so Congress funds it, and then it goes to a committee, and everyone on the committee owes favors and also wants to bring money from this project back to their own states. So the plane gets built in all different states. They're not even in the same state. And how do you build a decent weapon system when everybody's different who's making all the parts? And they're so far apart physically that it's not easy to sit down and talk eye to eye and handle stuff and look at it and look at it, all kinds of documentation and other ideas and so forth. So the United States really has poured billions of dollars into the newest fighter, F-35, and it is so expensive and so expensive to maintain that countries that actually bought it, 20 or 30 from the U.S., have parked them and just written it off, and they're buying Russian fighter jets or European fighter jets because they're much more practical, they're cheaper, and they probably do a better job. With the Russian arms industry and weapons industry, they have, for instance, their airplane builders, their aeronautical builders, aircraft companies, are from even before World War I. They have people of all different ages working there. They build very, very good planes. They'll take 2 or 3 ideas, and they'll take the last plane they built, and they will improve it. They'll upgrade it. They will modify it. And so each time, they don't have to redesign the whole entire plane. They're building on what they know of a plane that they want to improve on and make it faster or carry more munitions or whatever. And so they also have people of all different ages. So they have people who've been there their whole careers. They have new people who are starting. And they have a great think tank of experienced and talented people there teaching the new people, the next generation coming in. So Putin now has canceled all his orders for Boeing planes, and the reason is that Boeing has a backdoor in the computers on the planes, and the U.S. government can get into that plane computer anytime they want to. So he is also telling other countries about it. They are canceling their orders. And a friend of mine just went up to Boeing to visit a friend of his who works for Boeing. And that person said, I don't even know how they open the doors every day. There's so few people working there now. So our airline industries, our aircraft manufacturing industries are being impacted by this. And I did say this Silk Road and what's happening in Syria and all these countries we've been carrying out wars in is backfiring on us. We haven't done things that make other people benefit as much as we are benefiting. So we're stealing, we're taking things and not giving back, and that does build up resentment. It builds up bad public policy. It builds bad politics. We have a rotten government right now. It's very, very infiltrated with very bad influences. And there are a lot of very good people in our government. There really are. There are departments in our government agencies that parts of them work very well. But when they get targeted, and probably the education department, which is targeted by the Jesuits, is the most dysfunctional of all the agencies in the U.S. government. I asked an investigator for the Senate, and that's what he told me. So, so that's the F-35. It's a total loss, and now they're still, the Pentagon is still asking Congress for more money to try to fix it and make it work. It may be even $1 trillion now that they've spent on it. I don't know, but it's a lot of money. And then now compare that to the Su-35, which surprisingly or synchronously came out around the same time. It's a little younger than the F-35, but this plane, I've watched it, can go straight up in the air. It's very, very aerobatic. It cannot be detected on radar. No, it can be. Oh, well, they have very, very good, they have the best radar systems in the world, so they don't have to worry, and Putin's putting them in all the countries that need them to protect them from the U.S. And so this Su-35 is just fantastic, and it's on the battlefield in Syria now, and the Russians are providing the air support to the ground troops. So the Syrian army is flying in their planes. They're mostly older Russian MiGs and things that they had. Russia has upgraded them with better targeting systems, so they're very, very precise and very accurate when they drop bombs and shoot missiles. And the whole Syrian army is getting trained. China is there with an aircraft carrier. They're getting trained. They've never been in a war outside of China. This is the very first time. So they're also providing air support, and I believe they have troops on the ground too. And so this Syrian conflict, which the U.S. thought was going to be a cakewalk, and they thought they had Saudi Arabia and all the oil plantations in the Middle East on their side. Well, Putin just went in and he just started cleaning out the terrorists, and pretty soon the Hezbollah volunteered from Lebanon, and there's a Hezbollah in Iraq. Troops from Iraq came in. China sent an aircraft carrier and troops. Iran was one of the first to send troops and advisors, and it's fantastic. He's had great support, and they've made great allies. But the European countries and the U.S. have said they wanted to be there. They just went. It's illegal. They were not invited by the president of Syria, so they're illegally there. They have been bombing the civilian infrastructure, the civilian oil pipelines and processing plants. They have been bombing hospitals, schools, libraries, all of the civilian infrastructure, and they have reluctantly, finally, this month, they're starting to provide some air support for the Syrian troops on the ground, including the Kurds, but they're really not willing to kill the terrorists who they're also paying to be down there on the ground destroying Syria. So it's a very, very asymmetric, very bizarre, very unpredictable set of circumstances that have turned out in even more unpredictable ways. And basically, Putin has to squeeze these terrorists out of the Middle East and leave the countries and armies trained and strong enough to be able to defend themselves. They can also help each other now. And these terrorists have gone into Turkey, they've gone into Afghanistan. The Taliban kicked them out because they tried to take over the Taliban heroin and opium industry. And they're in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan now, way in the east of Central Asia. And China is in Syria because they don't want these terrorists coming out of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan into the Chinese Islamic tribal areas in Xinjiang, because then they'll start destroying China. And once Putin gets that cleaned out, he has to clean out Southeast Asia, and then the Eastern Europe, Eastern and Middle Europe, which the U.S. and NATO are causing a lot of problems. But basically, he wants to clean out the U.S., UK-sponsored terrorists and NATO, and then the Silk Road and Eurasia, the Eurasian continent, will be in a state of peace and prosperity as long as the Silk Road profits and benefits people. And once they get these parasites out of the Eurasian arena in the Middle East, it's going to be much more peaceful.
Right, right. Now, in terms of the dialectic here, it seems if we step back, talking about this process, it seems like the West and the U.S. and looking at all their levels are really in a process of breakdown. And whereas if we look at what you have termed the Silk Road or the East, the Russian, China, that kind of wave is in the process of a breakthrough. Do you see any positive kind of global synthesis coming out of this? Is there a way that the people on the West, I know that the controlling structures of the bankers, the central bankers, Rothschild, Rockefeller, all the central bankers, the controller bloodlines from the Zionists and all of that, those are going into breakdown or compression. But the people, is there any way that the 99.9% can break through in the West, or do the people have to go into breakdown as well as the controller system in the West, do you think?
Well, first of all, we're already working with a single intelligence system globally, so that all of the intelligence agencies are working together already. The goal is to have a sole source for everything. So all of the tires will come from one source, and all of the refrigerators will come from another source, and so forth and so on. And that's what they want. Now, there are many people in opposition who are players on this chessboard also, and Putin is one of them. And what Putin is doing is using international law and local laws to further his ambitions and his he knows what he wants. He's building a Silk Road economy, global one, and he's created the BRICS Bank. But what he has a vision. He's designed something. Of course, he's had many advisors and everything, but he has the political skill and personality and experience to be able to do this and to convince the people to go along with it. Now, I think that that when you look at how complex Russia is, there are many different kinds of people, different religions, different languages, different climates, different food, different thoughts, different education, different everything. It's a very, very, very large landmass, and it's very, very complex. And he said, we have to build a railroad because the climate doesn't allow us to have a dense infrastructure of regular roads. The climate destroys it. And so they decided to build a railroad. Now, the industry and the trade will grow up along that railroad track because it gives people access to transportation for goods or for traveling themselves. But where does this leave the West? Well, the West, in other words, Europe. We'll talk about that region. The western part of Eurasia is in a very unstable state now, and it's been a lot of it was the problem with the refugees, which the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, made an agreement with the President of Turkey to bring all these refugees, millions of them, into Europe without consulting with any member of any government in Europe. She just did it and opened all the doors, and they started flooding in. Well, guess where this idea came from? It came from the RAND Corporation. This is a NATO scam. This is a NATO agenda that's been on the agenda. There's a report written about how to do it. So the U.S., NATO, and the military went in and destabilized and destroyed these countries in the Middle East and North Africa and wherever they could, Central Asia, and they've created all these homeless people and people, young men who have no future. They are economic migrants. Only 25% of the people in Europe are Syrians, actually, and they're going to go back to their own country. These tragedies that are happening in Europe are shaping what the future of Europe is. And if they don't make the right decisions, if they don't get together and do what's best for Europe, but also to help these poor refugees return to wherever they came from or something better, find other countries that will take them, then this is going to destroy Europe. And I think Angela Merkel was blackmailed by the U.S. Putin has said for a couple of years she was being blackmailed by the U.S. So I don't know whether she went along with it willingly or, you know, her arm was twisted behind her back. But that refugee crisis that's destroying Europe came from the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica. Now, so that's one region. Europe hasn't been decided yet, but I think the European Union is not a good idea because it doesn't allow people to participate in their own government. In other words, it created a loss of sovereignty. The European countries lost their sovereignty, and that is what everyone around the world should be more interested in and more worried about right now than any other issue, is loss of sovereignty of their nation. And that's why it's very important for people to follow elections, to speak out as you've asked them to do today against that bill to make police anonymous. And we just, this is happening because we're letting them slide by us. We're letting them deceive us. Of course, they're doing a lot of cheating and lying, and that's how we got the voting machines and everything. But Canada votes still with paper ballots, and they can count them just as fast as the voting machines can count them and not count them sometimes. So I think that the more informed people are, the better off they're going to be. If you're not looking at reality, if you're not putting the right data in your calculator, you're not going to get a good answer. And certainly, it looks like the U.S. is definitely slipping into a police state. It definitely is. Anyone who thinks that is absolutely correct. It's accelerating. So people should start thinking, where can I live? Where can I relocate where the radiation exposure is going to be the lowest? Where can I go where they're not spraying chemtrails? Africa, they're not spraying chemtrails in Africa because the population density is too low. They're killing people with vaccines. So the southern hemisphere seems to be better than the northern hemisphere for radiation, avoiding radiation exposure. The southern hemisphere is less developed. So I believe there may be more opportunities there for people as the southern hemisphere develops. I'm talking more about South America. The mining of Antarctica is going to bring tremendous wealth to South American countries that qualify for some of the mineral rights. So I think South America is probably geographically, as well as Africa, the two best places to go to avoid radiation exposure from Fukushima and so forth. However, I have noticed that the Habsburg Empire, the countries that were in the Habsburg Empire, are being protected with HAARP. They are being heated up when cold, dense air from Japan is funneled into Europe. And if the air is warmer in over certain countries, that's higher pressure, it will keep the dense, colder air out of those regions. But just the sovereignty issue is really, really important, and also stopping nuclear technologies is very, very important. And what I don't like is that, what I'm alarmed about, is that Russia, their nuclear agencies, their nuclear companies, are building hundreds of new nuclear reactors around the world. And if they're not fusion reactors that produce no radioactive materials, then they must be fission, and that will be releasing radiation to continue poisoning the public. And these are all intended almost solely for third world countries. So are they now going after third world countries to depopulate them with radiation? And it also lowers the brain function. So we don't know. But I did want to talk about missiles before we finish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go to missiles.
Okay. So this is a way to answer your question that you just asked also, in terms of what really counts in projecting influence and what really counts in projecting power so that you have influence, which is what Putin has done. Like God, I've never seen anyone do it so effectively as he has. He's amazing. He's quite amazing, and he's avoided a war in the Ukraine, which would have spread throughout Eastern Europe and engulfed Russia in a terribly destructive war, and they would have lost in the end. And he's avoided a war in Syria. This is they're defending Syria now. They're defending Syria from an external enemy. So, in watching all these wars, I'm going to give an example of how other cultures, indigenous people, people in countries without money to spend on big military budgets, how they are operating, and look at how Putin has operated. And we are beginning to see that the American way of waging war is not winning anymore. And our foreign policy is not winning anymore. So either the U.S. changes or the U.S. goes down. It's real simple. So the example I'm giving is in Yemen. And in Yemen, they're engulfed in a war that's been going on almost a year now. And it's because of that Red Sea Suez Canal conflict, that theater of tension that's being created, because the U.S. wants pieces of the pie in Europe and in the Middle East and Central Asia, the oil and gas and other trading agreements. But it's just they want some of the money flow is what they want, and so they are involved in Yemen. They're involved in Syria. They're involved in Libya. They're now trying to get involved in Palestine and Israel. It's getting really, really, really crazy. And they're using Saudi Arabia to attack with a partner, United Arab Emirates, UAE, to attack Yemen. And they've bombed a lot of it. Then the UAE and Saudi Arabia started sending Blackwater in. UAE owns 49% of Blackwater. So they have their own army. They have their own army, and then they have their own mercenary army, the Blackwater. So then Syria, so Saudi Arabia started bombing Syria, Yemen, all over the place, knocking down hospitals, everything, the whole infrastructure, buildings, whole cities. They're just destroying everything they can. The United Arab Emirates and some of the other Gulf countries are helping. They have fighter jets also. They're bombing. Then there are a lot of Blackwater on the ground for the UAE and also especially for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is spending like a couple $1 million a day on weapons systems they're buying from the U.S. and munitions. Huge amounts of money. They're just pouring down the drain. And they've lost everything in Yemen. They can't win there. So why can't they win with the most advanced tanks, the most advanced planes, the most well-equipped army in the world, probably. With the money they've spent on it, it should be. Well, what happened is Yemen was the terminus of the Southeast Asian spice trade, as I mentioned before. This is at least 5,000 years old. And the people who live in Yemen, there are a lot of indigenous tribes. Some of them are Iranian origin. There are traders. There are Arab traders who have traded for a long time. It's a very, very rich and very, very interesting history. So the Saudis got a new king a year ago, and his son, who's 31, wants to be the next king after his father, but he's not the legitimate heir according to the tribal rules. So he said, well, maybe if I start a war against Yemen, they have all this undeveloped oil and gas, then I'll have a better chance of of becoming the next king after my father. So he started the war in Yemen, and he had no idea. He's the Minister of Defense, and he's the head of OPEC. 31 years old. So he started this war in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia already has all of the world's oil prices so depressed that they're driving the oil shale and tar sands operators out of business in Canada and the U.S., and they are driving oil producers all over the world into debt, and none as much as themselves. So Saudi Arabia will be officially bankrupt in 1 year, if you can believe that.
Right.
So they this war started, and what happened is Yemen can't afford missiles. They can't afford. Probably don't even have a military budget. They have volunteers who stepped forward and formed the Yemeni army and volunteer army, and they started fighting back against the Saudis. And the one thing that Yemen does have is a special rocket, and they went to Iran and asked them to show them how to make them themselves. So Iran got the ideas from China and then from Russia originally. And so the Yemenis started making these rockets, and they don't have tanks hardly at all or any heavy equipment. They are using these rockets and a very good intelligence network to kill hundreds of Saudi, Blackwater, whoever coalition troops at one time with one rocket, and the commanders too. And what's happened is these people, these indigenous tribes, the whole group is called the Houthis. The whole resistance is called Houthis. The Houthis for the man who started it in about 2004. And they, in these tribes that are living in the mountains up on the border with Saudi Arabia confiscated their land, so they want it back, so they're fighting the hardest. But Alfred, they look like they're in the Bible. They're wearing those rough leather shoes that you see in the Bible. They're wearing turbans. They're wearing just a piece of cloth wrapped around their skirts that go down to their ankles. They're wrapped around their waist. They go down to their ankles, and they're out in the desert walking around, hiding behind rocks. And the formal troops, the enemy, they're all driving around like they look like dung beetles in Abrams tanks and armored personnel carriers and everything, and they can't kill anyone because they can't see the enemy. They're all hiding all over the place behind rocks and hills and everything. And they have been picking off 200 and 300 Blackwaters with one rocket. and the commanders. They killed 6 American colonels and 300 troops with one rocket, and they're doing this every day. And so last week, Blackwater packed up all their troops, all their equipment that was left, and they left Yemen because they had lost so many men, they had lost so many planes that were shot down, they had lost so many tanks that this Yemeni rocket goes right through their tanks, and so they left. And whoever chased Blackwater out of a country, I've never heard of that. And it's these little guys who look like they're biblical, walking around with rockets, and they're very, very, very accurate, extremely accurate. And so they're just taking over military bases, and they're walking in. They don't even have trucks or tanks or anything. And you see, it's the strategy that wins wars. It's not might that wins wars. It's strategy. And Putin and Russia are winning because Putin has very good advisors around him, and he listens to them. They discuss things. He makes the final decision, but he always consults all of them. He has war strategy. That's through his martial arts experience. And he insists on all parties, for instance, on the UN Security Council, honoring the laws and the rules of the UN Security Council, the United Nations Charter, and so forth. And he's forcing them. They've always violated everything, and he's forcing them now to honor those rules. So asking me what will happen and what should people do and everything in the future, well, watch him and learn yourself. You can protect yourself by doing what he does and learning how he uses strategy to win. And I just think that this horrible disease that's taken over the world of plundering and destroying and burning to the ground and poisoning, I just hope this is coming to a slowdown. But, it really is the agenda of the Jesuits.
Right. Right. So it seems that we're going through a part of a transition, and I'm just wondering what the end game of that transition is.
Well, the ones at the top, those are the ancient Iranian tribes. They want total slavery. And so they said, well, this is what David Rockefeller said in his memoirs. He said, we're going to put everyone on a satellite with a number, and that's going to be their bank account or their energy account or whatever. And he said, no one will be allowed to take any more out of the system than they put in. If they don't want to work, we'll just go click and turn their number off. And that's what they want to do. Now, it's very interesting that about a month ago, I read that Iran was thinking of no longer having a currency. In other words, this is the first step, as we're seeing other first steps toward big changes, major changes. And this is going to full digital accounting for people's property and money and so forth in transactions. And that's not real portable if they don't want you to have it. You can't just put it in your pocket, and leave, go to another country. They have total control over us. They're going to if this kind of thing progresses.
So this would be, was the proposed or the contemplated or some of the options that Iran was considering, was it like a digital currency or a chip or something like that?
Yes, it would be something like that.
Yeah.
Yes. but it'll end up on satellites. That's where it's going to end up.
So that really exposes the fact that money is a control system. It's not a system for storage of wealth or exchange of goods and services. It's primarily a state control system.
Yes, it is. And they want to control it even more tightly. And what they plan, and this is what Agenda 21 was about, which Prince Charles was involved in, was it's a complete inventory of all living things on this planet. And I followed them systematically, following a grid. This is through NASA. And the newspapers. I've been following new species of animals and birds and things like that discovered. And you can tell exactly what the grid lines are because they're identifying these new plants and animals on a grid. You know, they first they went down the west coast of North America to South America. Then they came up the other side. And every time they found new species, they wanted to advertise them and put the name out in the public media because it was in the scientific literature. And they, in so doing, they revealed the grid that they're following to do this global inventory. So, what would they want? A global inventory of every fish, every frog, every human, every tree. If they weren't going to do something just like what I said. No ownership. There will be no ownership. People won't own houses or anything. They will not be allowed to own anything.
Well, what will the elite do under such a circumstance?
Well, they have all the money, and so it's going to be a world of robots doing what they don't need us to do. And so that it will result in a lowering of the population until they have the balance they want of robots and humans.
So
they're changing humans at the same time, the chromosomes. That's part of what the chemtrails are about. The uranium that people are inhaling is sticking, it's getting into the cells, and it sticks onto the DNA, the histome of the DNA. And each of these nanoparticles of uranium or carbon or anything, wherever they lodge in the body, they're antennas. They transmit and they receive. And so they can change the chromosomes on the DNA and actually change the physical expression of the human being.
So this is what you're describing, the transhumanist agenda. This is what you're describing is terraforming according to the transhumanist agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that may not happen. They're doing this rollout so fast that people are confused. They don't really have time to comprehend what's happening. They're being rolled over. But there will be some people who do understand, and there are more people waking up, and a lot of people are saying thank you in the comment section on our interviews, Alfred. You and I have been doing interviews together for 14 years, I guess. So it's very, very important for this information to get out to the public, and it's hard to do. It's a struggle to do this, especially now since Jade Helm and Cybercom is attacking people's computers and the internet, and there are politicians backing it, and like McCain, and it's very, very difficult. But I wouldn't like to do anything else. This is what I enjoy doing. I want people to know. I want to inform people with the right information, and then they can go and make their own decisions. And it's not about me being right or wrong. It's about me making people aware, giving them the right questions to ask so that they can go and begin to educate themselves.
Right, right. Do you look at any concepts of the quote singularity, like 2045, that the transhumanist forces are allegedly trying to push, where this planet gets terraformed into a robotic planet, or not?
Well, I think the biggest, really the biggest opportunity to challenge it is the Silk Road. And
Right.
if people are moving along the tracks, they're building up community along the railroad line, and they are creating their own local economy, which they can trade with others on the Silk Road. I think that is the most promising thing to counter what the New World Order wants to do.
Yeah, when we were back in a segment of the program, and you were discussing where people might think of moving from a radiation point of view or other points of view, I was surprised that you didn't mention moving to the 11 time zones of the Russian Federation, for example.
Oh, well, of course that's an option, and a lot of Americans have already relocated their expats all over the world, colonies of them. And so you won't necessarily be living completely out of your culture to begin with. I prefer living in the culture, fully immersed in any country that I visit, because that's how I learn, and that's how I learn about the culture and the people. And what am I traveling for if I want to live in America wherever I land? I don't want to. I like differences. I like being different. I like meeting people who are different. Differences are good. They help work towards better solutions when you're considering lots of things. So I just think that the Silk Road is going to have a lot of opportunities for people, at least in the beginning. We don't know what will happen. I can't predict in the future because anything can happen. And this mad scheme that the real agenda that they're trying to roll out is just so crazy. I don't see how it can work. They can't. There's so many variables. They couldn't possibly model them or consider them. They're selectively picking variables that fit their agenda and what they want the outcome to be, and they think that's going to work for them, but I don't think it will.
Right.
One of the reasons that they want the one world government and one world order is they are chomping at the bit right now to start mining without any oversight, no environmental laws, nothing. And they will devastate this planet. They will, I can guarantee it. They're going to do it to Antarctica. They are allowing boat people to land, refugees from Myanmar or Bangladesh or Indonesia. They're landing on the beaches in Australia. Those are going to be the miners they use in Antarctica. And the South Island, all kinds of wealthy people like Bill Gates and all kinds of people like that, movie stars, have bought land on the South Island, but also there are military exercises going on there. And there's a lot of underground facilities there also. So that has been carved out of New Zealand and set aside as a British territory or operation base for Antarctica. And Antarctica is two very large continents that are welded down the middle together. This is tectonic collision, and Antarctica is a continent. It's a very, very minerally rich continent, and the Arctic Ocean is an ocean. There is no continental material that is in a big landmass like in the Antarctic. It's not in the Arctic. It's surrounded by the edges of countries, Russia and Canada and so forth, but that is not part of the Antarctic continent. So it's going to be very, very interesting. The energy industry, people should follow that. Food industry, Putin is opening up vast areas of land in Russia that have never been farmed or touched before. He's giving people farms and land and tractors and whatever they need. And Russia is going to be no GMO. He does not want genetically modified organisms in Russia. And they've had them, but he's getting rid of it. And that's, of course, why Monsanto, which is Jesuit created and owned, wants the Ukraine. It's Monsanto who's behind the war in the Ukraine, because Monsanto wants that whole country to grow their GMO food to poison Europe and other countries around that they can supply food to. That's what the battle's really about over the Ukraine. And it's been a horrible war. The CIA junta overthrow of the legitimately elected government of the Ukraine. It'll take at least 20 years of hard work to get the Ukraine back to the way it was when the CIA overthrew the last president. There's so much happening. So many people are getting hurt. Putin said that a long time ago. He said horrible things are going to happen. A lot of people are going to get hurt. But he said this idea will never work, and he meant the New World Order idea.
Right.
I believe him. I think he's going to be right. He's been right about so much already.
Well, exactly. Now we're coming to the end of this segment. Is there anything that you wanted to mention in this program that you have not gotten a chance to bring up?
Well, I forgot to mention the Mistrals, the two Mistrals that France built for Russia, and Russia paid for them. They were kind of medium-sized military ships for helicopters. And because of the sanctions, France refused to deliver them. And finally, they were sold to Egypt. Isn't that interesting? So they're one's for the north end of the Suez and the Mediterranean, and the other one is for the straits at the south end, opposite Djibouti. So isn't that just really funny that they end up protecting the Red Sea from the U.S. and NATO, and then the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. That's the straits that go through the middle of Istanbul between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. That's another hotspot right now. It's a real problem for Turkey because they don't want to let Russia go through there. Russia would have to go all the way around the Atlantic route and into the Mediterranean to get supplies back and forth. But we'll see what happens. I don't think Egypt can do very much now. They've certainly alienated everyone. So that was just to mention a couple things I forgot to say. And what I do want to say is that by watching successful people execute plans and agendas and negotiate, watch someone who's a winner. And I'm saying that Putin is a very good negotiator. I'm not saying anything about his past or what his other values are or anything, but he certainly has been very successful in the Ukraine and in Syria avoiding war. And war is what the U.S. and NATO wanted because we're a war-based economy. It's not what Russia wanted. Russia is building a new world economy. They don't want to waste their resources on war. And it doesn't seem that if you compare Russia's $50 billion war budget a year, that's their defense budget, to America's that is over $550 million a year, how come we're losing and they're winning? How come the Houthis make their own rockets and they're winning and Saudi Arabia and Blackwater are losing? It's not how big your rockets, it's not how big your tanks are or how many planes you have or how many feet you have on the ground or whatever. If your troops are not trained, if they're not professional, if they're not motivated, they're not going to win for you. They don't want to. They're not interested. There's nothing in it for them. They know they're just going to get killed. So why should they try for somebody else's benefit? And and in terms of lawlessness, Putin has actually forced these other countries to follow the law, to operate within the laws of warfare, of economic stability, of whatever. I just think that good or bad, whatever he's done in the past, you have to look what he's doing now. And I'm recommending that people adjust their lives to strategies that bring them success in advancing their agenda. And people need to be very, very careful about radiation exposure now, chemtrail exposure, and living in a culture that has stability. The U.S. doesn't have stability. And now it's going to be looted. They're going to come and make a third world out of the United States now. Our own military is going to come home and eat us alive.
Well, that's a very sober note. I will leave it on that note. You've ended on other notes, but that's a very sober note to leave it on.
Well, the point is that you don't need a big army to win. The Houthis don't have a big army. They're fighting in leather sandals that they wore in biblical times.
Yeah.
You don't need that. You need to know what you want, and you need to have. You need to be realistic about the agenda, and then you need to project power and project influence to reach your goals. And everybody wants to survive now. The only way they're going to survive is by helping each other, by sharing. This is we're being poured down a funnel right now, and it's happened before, lots and lots of times. The indigenous people have been through this so many times. That's what I learned by watching them. The Houthis out there in the desert taking out Abrams tanks and airplanes, shooting them down, and all they had was the munitions they carried out into the desert. So it's not hopeless, but you have to have a strategy. And all they want to do is to live in isolation in the mountains, in their villages, and they don't want any visitors from the outside world because they know they're all infiltrators. So why can't we live like that? Why can't we live in our villages, our towns, our cities, and be happy and have jobs? This was all stolen from us through deception, through deceit, through forced everything, forced legislation, crooked politicians, but we let it happen. Why did we allow the U.S. to be an economy since 1776, where we were at war with some country every day since 1776? What else could be the outcome than what's happening now? But there are lots of places to go and live and to thrive and to build a new life with a whole lot more hope and a whole lot more opportunity than we have now in the U.S. I don't want to leave the U.S. No, I don't think a lot of Americans don't want to leave. But if you can't survive here, if you don't like what the Bolshevik Revolution did to Russia, this is going to be much worse. So it's not so hard to move. All those indigenous people move. Every time there was a stressor or a drought or hostile takeover or whatever, they just moved. They moved out of the way. So that's what we can do. It's easy.
Well, thank you, Leuren, for these insights. As I said, they're very sobering, and we'll just weigh them in the balance with other insights. And
well, yes.
Thank you for taking time out to join us.
Thank you. I'd like to mention our website,
yes,
LeurenMoret.info, and a lot of the interviews that Alfred and I have done, and Laurence and Alfred and I have done, and other people are on the site. We have a lot of information about the different wars that we followed. There's a lot of information about Fukushima. There is information about lifestyles, what food to eat, how to clean it in a contaminated area, how to filter your water with a reverse osmosis water filter. We installed one under our sink. There's a write-up on how to do that. You just order it from Amazon. And there are all kinds of things, and then also periodically we put out a kind of a newsletter with an update of news that we think people are interested in and probably don't have time to look for. So there's a lot on the website, and then we also very much appreciate the comments that people make. We're getting really great comments on our interviews and a lot of viewers. It's sometimes 5,000 a day. That's really great. And we do need support. We need your support. And there's a donation button. You can send a PayPal donation or from your bank. And that's on the website, and it's on the left side on most of the web pages. And please come and visit our site. And we're going to have a store soon where we will be selling. People can order biomats, Geiger counters, iodine. I want to put books up also that we recommend. Those are great. The information's wonderful, and a lot of them you can get used from Amazon, so they're cheap too. And we just really, really appreciate everyone, all the personal comments and the appreciation and the praise and the love and just the great spirit from all of you. So thank you, Alfred, for making this possible, and all of your hard work. We've been working together since, I think, 2001 or 2. That's a long time. And we really, really enjoy doing these interviews and getting to know more people. So please write to us at LeurenMoret.info and tell us what you think. Send us ideas or poems that I can read or to other people or whatever. And we're just happy to hear about what you're doing and how you're doing, and say hello and introduce yourself. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you, Leuren. Great. Thank you very much.